The stars looked cold and distant through the bridge windows of the UNS Liberty. Captain Jake Morrison stood with his hands behind his back, watching the massive planet grow larger on the screen. Zorath Prime was beautiful in a dangerous way, with purple oceans and silver cities that stretched across entire continents. "We're getting a signal from the surface, Captain," said Lieutenant Amy Ross from her station. "They're giving us landing coordinates." Jake nodded. After 3 months of traveling through space, they had finally reached the heart of the Zorathian Empire. This was the moment that could change everything for humanity. The trade agreement they hoped to sign would give Earth access to rare metals that could power their ships for the next 100 years. "Take us down, Lieutenant," Jake said. "Nice and easy." The ship shook slightly as they entered the planet's atmosphere. Through the windows, Jake could see the Imperial City growing larger. It was huge beyond imagination. Buildings rose like mountains from the ground, connected by bridges that sparkled in the alien sunlight. At the center of it all stood the palace, a structure so large it looked like a small mountain made of black stone and glowing metal. Dr. Lisa Parker joined Jake at the window. She was a small woman with bright eyes who knew more about alien cultures than anyone else on Earth. "It's incredible," she whispered. "The Zorathians have been building this city for over 3,000 years, and they want us to believe we're nothing compared to them," said Commander Tony Garcia as he walked onto the bridge. Tony was a big man with scars on his hands from his years as a soldier. He didn't trust aliens, especially ones who acted like they owned the galaxy. Ambassador Helen Brooks was the last to arrive. She wore her best diplomatic clothes and carried a briefcase full of trade documents. Helen had spent her whole career making deals with difficult people, but even she looked nervous about meeting the Zorathian Emperor. "Remember," Helen said to the group, "we're here to make friends, not enemies. The Zorathians have been in space longer than we've had written language. We need to show them respect." Tony made a face. "Respect is earned, not given away for free." The Liberty landed on a platform near the palace. As soon as the engines shut down, alien guards surrounded the ship. The Zorathians were tall, lizard-like creatures with scales that changed color in the light. They wore armor made of the same, black metal as their buildings, and they carried weapons that hummed with energy. The palace guard captain was a massive creature named Kethmore. His scales were dark green with gold patterns, and mechanical parts had been attached to his head and arms. When he spoke, his voice sounded like rocks grinding together. "Humans," Kethmore said, making the word sound like an insult. "You will follow. You will not speak unless spoken to. You will show proper respect to your betters." Jake felt his jaw tighten, but he said nothing. They had come too far to start a fight on the landing platform. The walk to the palace took nearly an hour. The building was even more impressive up close. The walls were covered in carvings that told the story of Zorathian conquests across the galaxy. Jake saw images of 100 different alien species, all kneeling before Zorathian warriors. Inside, the palace was like a maze. Corridors stretched in every direction, filled with aliens from dozens of different worlds. Some looked like walking trees, others like living crystals, and still others like creatures from Earth's deepest oceans. But they all had one thing in common. They looked afraid. "These are all vassal species," Lisa whispered to Jake. "They serve the Empire because they have no choice." The humans were given rooms in what the guards called the guest quarters, but the rooms felt more like prison cells. The walls were bare stone, the beds were hard metal slabs, and the windows were too small to climb through. The food they brought was some kind of gray paste that tasted like cardboard. "This is how they treat diplomatic guests?" Tony asked, poking at his meal with disgust. "They're making a point," Helen said. "They want us to know our place before we even meet the Emperor." For 3 weeks, they waited. Every day they asked to meet with the Emperor. Every day, they were told to wait. The guards treated them like annoying children who should be grateful for any attention at all. Finally, on a cold morning when the alien sun cast long shadows through their small windows, Kethmore came to their rooms. The Eternal. "Emperor will see you now," he announced. "You will kneel when you enter his presence. You will not speak unless he gives you permission. You will accept whatever he offers you with gratitude. They were led through more corridors to a massive door made of gold and black metal. The door was so heavy it took 6 guards to open it. Beyond was the throne room, a space so large that Jake couldn't see the far walls clearly. Emperor Vextar sat on a throne that looked like it had been carved from a single massive diamond. He was enormous, even by Zarathian standards, with dark, red scales and mechanical parts covering half his body. Tubes and wires connected him to machines that hummed and clicked with each breath he took. His eyes glowed with artificial light, and when he moved, Jake could hear the whir of motors and the hiss of hydraulics. "So," the Emperor said, his voice echoing through the vast room, "these are the humans I have heard about, the young species that thinks it can make deals with the Zarathian Empire." Helen stepped forward and bowed politely. "Your Imperial Majesty, we come in peace seeking friendship and trade between our peoples." The Emperor laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Friendship? Trade? Child, you do not understand. Young species do not make friends with their elders. They serve. They obey. They give tribute." He leaned forward on his throne, the machines keeping him alive, whining with the effort. "I will make you an offer, humans. Give us exclusive rights to mine your worlds, accept the honor of becoming our vassals, and we will allow your species to survive. Refuse, and return to your little planet to wait for our war fleets." Helen's face went pale, but she kept her voice steady. "Your Majesty, surely we can find terms that benefit both our peoples." "Silence," the Emperor roared, his mechanical parts sparking with anger. "Young species do not negotiate with their betters. You have heard my offer. Guards, take them back to their quarters. They will remain there until they accept the wisdom of serving the Empire." As the guards surrounded them, Jake caught Lisa's eye. She had been studying the Emperor carefully during the entire meeting, and now she looked worried about something more than just their diplomatic failure. The throne room doors slammed shut, behind them with a sound like thunder, leaving them alone with the growing certainty that their peaceful mission had just become something much more dangerous. Back in their prison-like quarters, the 4 humans sat in silence for a long time. The gray walls seemed to press in on them, and the small window showed only the dark towers of the alien city beyond. "Well, that went badly," Tony said, breaking the quiet. He was cleaning his sidearm, a habit he had when he was angry. "I told you these lizards couldn't be trusted." Helen sat at the small metal table staring at her hands. 30 years of diplomatic training, and I've never been dismissed like that. He didn't even pretend to listen to our offer." Jake paced back and forth in the narrow space between the beds. "There has to be something we're missing. Why bring us all this way just to insult us? They could have refused our trade request over long-range communication." Lisa had been quiet since they returned from the throne room. She sat on her bed with a small device in her hands, studying readings on its tiny screen. The device looked like a medical scanner, but Jake knew it could detect much more than just biological signs. "Lisa?" Jake asked. "You've been staring at that thing for an hour. What did you find?" Lisa looked up, her face pale with worry. "I've been analyzing the energy readings I took during our meeting with the Emperor. Jake, something is very wrong with him." She held up the scanner so they could all see the display. Strange patterns of light moved across the screen like a heartbeat, but the rhythm was irregular and weak. "These are his life signs," Lisa explained. "All those machines connected to his body aren't just for show. They're keeping him alive. But the energy patterns are failing. His biomechanical systems are breaking down." Tony stopped cleaning his weapon. "What does that mean?" "It means the Eternal Emperor isn't so eternal," Lisa said. "Based on these readings, I'd say he has maybe 6 months to live. His body is rejecting the mechanical parts that have kept him alive for centuries." Helen sat up straight. "That explains his desperation for our mineral resources. Some of those rare metals we have on Earth are used in advanced life support systems." Jake felt pieces of a puzzle clicking together in his mind. "So this isn't really about making us vassals. He needs our resources to save his own life." "But there's more," Lisa continued. "I also detected something else during our audience. The palace is full of hidden energy signatures. There are weapon systems built into the walls, surveillance, equipment everywhere, and communication networks that span the entire galaxy. But many of them are offline or running on backup power. The Empire is falling apart, Jake realized. Not just the Emperor, but the whole system. Over the next few days, they began to pay closer attention to their guards and the other aliens in the palace. What they discovered confirmed their worst fears and gave them their first glimpse of hope. Commander Garcia had always been good at reading people, even alien people. He noticed that the Zorathian guards often looked tired and worried. They whispered to each other when they thought no one was listening, and their conversations weren't about military tactics or guard duties. "They're scared," Tony told the others during one of their evening meetings. "I've seen that look before in soldiers who know their cause is lost. These guards are starting to doubt their own empire." Helen had made friends with one of the servants, who brought their meals. The creature looked like a walking plant with flower petals for a face, and it came from a world called Karas that had been conquered by the Zorathians 200 years ago. The servant's name was Bloom, and it spoke in a whisper like wind through leaves. Bloom told Helen that many of the vassal species were secretly meeting in the lower levels of the palace. They were planning something, but Bloom was too frightened to say what. "They remember freedom," Bloom whispered to Helen one evening as it delivered their gray-paced dinner. "The young ones born under Zorathian rule dream of worlds they have never seen, worlds where their people made their own choices." "What are they planning?" Helen asked gently. Bloom's petals trembled with fear. "They wait for a sign that the Emperor can be challenged. But who would dare? He has ruled for 800 years. His power reaches every star system in this part of the galaxy." That night, Lisa made another disturbing discovery. Using her scanner to study the palace structure, she found that the building's defensive systems were running on emergency power. The massive energy shields that protected the palace could fail at any moment. The weapon systems that kept vassal species in line were breaking down, just like the Emperor himself. "It's like watching a giant machine slowly falling apart," Lisa explained to the others. "The Emperor has lived so long that he's outlasted his own technology. The Empire is held together by fear and habit, not by actual strength." Jake realized they were seeing something that no one else in the galaxy understood. The mighty Zorathian Empire was a facade hiding a crumbling foundation, but that knowledge was also dangerous. "If we're right about this," Jake said, "then the Emperor can't let us leave. We've seen too much. We know his weakness." The next morning brought proof of Jake's words. Instead of their usual guards, a squad of elite Zorathian soldiers arrived at their quarters. These warriors were bigger and more heavily armed than the regular guards, and their armor gleamed with fresh maintenance. Their leader was a female Zorathian with silver scales and cold yellow eyes. She introduced herself as General Zarath, the Emperor's personal enforcer. "Humans," General Zarath said in a voice like breaking ice, "you have been chosen for a great honor. Tomorrow the Emperor will address the full Galactic Senate. Representatives from every vassal species will gather to hear his words of wisdom." She paused, studying their faces with predatory interest. "You will be brought before the Senate as an example. The galaxy will watch as your species kneels before imperial authority. Your submission will remind all vassal species of their proper place." Helen stepped forward. "And if we refuse?" General Zarath smiled, showing rows of sharp teeth. "Then the galaxy will watch you die instead. Either way, you will serve the Empire's purposes." After the general left, the four humans sat in stunned silence. They had come to make a trade agreement and ended up trapped in the middle of a galactic crisis. The dying Emperor planned to use their humiliation to shore up his failing power, and they had no way to escape. But Jake was thinking about something else entirely. He was thinking about all those frightened vassal species waiting for a sign that the Emperor could be challenged. He was thinking about Bloom's whispered words about dreams of freedom. Maybe it was time to give them that sign. The morning of the Senate gathering arrived with a blood-red sunrise over Zorath Prime. Jake had barely slept, his mind working through the plan that could either free dozens of species or get them all killed. He looked at his three companions, knowing he was about to ask them to risk everything. I need to tell you something, Jake said as they prepared for what might be their final day. I'm not going to kneel before that dying tyrant. Tony looked up from checking his boots. Good. I was hoping you'd say that. Helen frowned with worry. Jake, if we resist, they'll kill us in front of the entire galaxy. That won't help anyone. Maybe, Jake said. But what if we don't just resist? What if we expose the truth about the Emperor's condition? What if we show all those vassal species that their master is just a sick old lizard holding on to power through lies? Lisa understood immediately. You want to reveal his medical condition to the Senate. More than that, Jake said. I want to prove that he can be challenged. I want to show them that the Eternal Emperor is mortal. Before they could discuss the plan further, General Zareth arrived with her soldiers. The humans were fitted with energy restraints around their wrists and led through the palace corridors toward the Senate chamber. The Senate building was even more impressive than the throne room. It was a massive dome that could hold 50,000 beings, with circular levels rising up from a central platform. Representatives from hundreds of worlds filled the seats, their different shapes and colors creating a living rainbow of alien life. Jake saw species he recognized from Earth's databases: the tree-like Corasians, the crystal Vorthak, the octopus-like Tenthari. But he also saw dozens of races that humans had never encountered before. All of them looked nervous and afraid. At the top of the dome sat Emperor Vextar on a golden throne. Even from a distance, Jake could see the cables and tubes connecting him to his life support machines. The mechanical parts of his body glowed with unstable energy, and his breathing sounded labored through the chamber's speakers. The humans were brought to the center platform, surrounded by guards. General Zareth spoke to the assembled crowd in the booming voice that echoed through the dome. Citizens of the Empire, she announced, today we witness the submission of a new species. The humans will kneel before imperial authority and accept their place as vassals of the eternal throne. A murmur ran through the crowd. Some species looked excited to see someone else humiliated, but many others watched with sad understanding. They had all been in this position once. Emperor Vextar raised one mechanical hand for silence. When he spoke, his voice was amplified to fill the entire chamber, but Jake could hear the weakness beneath the artificial power. Young humans, the Emperor said, you stand before the representatives of 1,000 worlds. All of them serve the Empire willingly, knowing that strength brings order and order brings peace. Kneel now and your species will find its place in this great design. Jake stepped forward, his heart pounding but his voice steady. No. The single word hit the chamber like a thunderclap. 50,000 beings held their breath. No one had ever refused the Emperor in public before. What did you say? Vextar demanded, his mechanical parts sparking with anger. I said no, Jake repeated, louder this time. We didn't come here to kneel. We came to offer friendship between equals. If you can't accept that, then we'll leave and find other species who understand what partnership means. The Emperor's rage was terrible to see. His biomechanical systems overloaded with the effort of his fury, sending arcs of electricity across his body. You dare defy me? I am eternal. I have ruled this galaxy since before your world knew fire. You're not eternal, Jake said, and now his voice carried to every corner of the dome. You're dying. The words hit the chamber like a physical blow. Gasps and cries came from thousands of throats. General Zareth moved toward Jake with her weapon drawn, but he kept talking. Dr. Parker, Jake called to his companion. Tell them what you found. Lisa stepped forward, her scanner in her hands. Her voice shook with nervousness, but her words were clear. The Emperor's biomechanical systems are failing. His body is rejecting the technology that has kept him alive for centuries. Based on my medical analysis, he has less than 6 months to live. The chamber erupted in chaos. Representatives leaped to their feet, shouting in dozens of languages. Some cried out in disbelief, others in hope, and still others in fear of what this revelation might mean. Emperor Vextar tried to speak, but his voice was drowned out by the noise. His life support systems were failing under the stress, alarms beeping and warning lights flashing across his mechanical parts. Lies, he finally managed to scream. Kill them! Kill them all! General Zarath raised her weapon, but something unprecedented happened. Her soldiers hesitated. They had heard the truth about their emperor's condition, and suddenly his commands didn't seem as absolute as before. Jake saw his moment and took it. While the guards were distracted and the emperor was struggling, with his failing systems, he broke free from his restraints. The energy cuffs were designed to hold prisoners, not to stop someone desperate enough to ignore the pain. He ran straight toward the emperor's throne, his burned hand still smoking from the energy discharge. Guards tried to intercept him, but Tony and Helen had also broken free and were creating a distraction. Jake reached the throne just as Emperor Vextar was trying to activate emergency weapons hidden throughout the chamber. The old tyrant was weaker than he looked, his body failing him at the crucial moment. 800 years of lies, Jake said, as he grabbed the emperor by his ornate robes. 800 years of fear and oppression. Let's see how eternal you really are. With strength born of desperation and righteous anger, Jake pulled the emperor from his throne. The biomechanical systems connecting Vextar to his life support sparked and tore as he was dragged away from his power source. The emperor tried to resist, but his ancient body was too weak. His mechanical parts sparked and smoked as they were, disconnected from their power sources. The great tyrant who had ruled 1,000 worlds was reduced to a helpless old creature, being pulled across the floor of his own senate. Jake dragged him to the center of the platform, in full view of every representative in the chamber. The emperor's scales had turned gray with shock, his glowing eyes flickering like dying stars. "Look at him," Jake shouted to the assembled crowd. "Look at your eternal master. He's just flesh and blood like all of us. He can be defeated." The sight of their supposedly divine emperor being dragged helplessly across the Senate floor broke something fundamental in the minds of the vassal species. The psychological chains that had bound them for centuries suddenly seemed as fragile as the dying tyrant before them. One by one, representatives began to stand up in their seats, their voices joining together in a sound that Jake would never forget, the sound of freedom being born. The Senate chamber had become a storm of voices and movement. 50,000 beings from across the galaxy were on their feet, shouting, crying, and singing in languages Jake had never heard. The sound was overwhelming, like standing inside thunder. Itself, Emperor Vexitar lay on the platform where Jake had dropped him, his mechanical parts sparking and smoking. The great tyrant who had ruled for 8 centuries was now just a dying old creature, his breath coming in short gasps. His glowing eyes flickered as his life support systems failed one by one. General Zarath stood frozen, her weapon still raised, but her target unclear. Some of her soldiers had dropped their weapons entirely, staring at their fallen emperor in shock. Others looked around nervously, unsure whether to fight or flee. The first species to formally declare independence was the Carasians. Their representative, a tall being that looked like a flowering tree, stood in the front row and spoke in a voice like rustling leaves. "For 200 years we have served the Empire," the Carasian announced. "We gave our resources, our children, our freedom. Today we take it all back. Karis declares itself free of Zarathian rule." The declaration sent a wave of excitement through the chamber. Within minutes, dozens of other species were standing to make similar announcements. The crystal beings of Vorthak Prime announced they were reclaiming their mining worlds. The ocean, dwellers of Aquatica, said they would no longer send tribute to the Empire. One by one, the building blocks of Vextar's power crumbled away. Tony had managed to disarm several guards and was now helping Helen coordinate with the friendlier species representatives. His military training was useful in organizing the chaos into something more productive. "We need to secure the palace," Tony told a group of former vassal leaders who had gathered around the human team. "There are still loyal forces out there who might try to restore the Empire by force." Commander Lisa was kneeling beside the dying emperor, not out of respect, but to monitor his failing condition. Her medical scanner showed energy levels dropping rapidly across all his biomechanical systems. "He doesn't have long," she told Jake quietly. "His body is shutting down." The shock of being disconnected from his life support was too much. Jake looked down at the creature who had threatened to enslave humanity just hours before. Emperor Vextar was trying to speak, but only weak sounds came from his throat. His scales had turned completely gray, and his mechanical parts were going. Dark one by one. Can you hear me? Jake asked, crouching beside the fallen tyrant. Vextar's eyes focused on Jake with difficulty. When he spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. You have destroyed everything. No, Jake said firmly. We've freed everything. All those species you kept under your boot for centuries. They're finally going to be able to choose their own paths. The Emperor tried to laugh, but it came out as a cough that sprayed green blood across the platform. Chaos, war, without the Empire. They will destroy each other. Maybe, Jake admitted. Or maybe they'll surprise you. Maybe they'll work together because they want to, not because they're forced to. Helen had been talking with representatives from the major vassal species, and now she approached Jake with an excited expression. Despite everything they had been through, she was still a diplomat at heart, and she could see the opportunity that was opening before them. Jake, she said, they want to form a council, a democratic government where every species gets an equal voice. They're asking for our help in setting it up. Around the platform, the celebration was growing louder. Species that had been enemies under the Empire were embracing each other. The Tenthari were sharing water with the desert-dwelling Sandkin. The energy beings called sparklers were creating light shows that made the crystal Vorthax sing with joy. But not everyone was celebrating. General Zarath had rallied some of the loyal guards and was trying to establish order. She activated a communication device and spoke into it with urgent authority. All Imperial forces, she commanded. The Emperor has been attacked by terrorists. Lock down the palace and prepare to eliminate all rebel forces. Alarms began to sound throughout the massive building. Heavy blast doors started to close, and the sound of marching feet echoed from the corridors outside the Senate chamber. Tony heard the approaching soldiers and grabbed Jake's arm. We've got company coming, a lot of it. The celebration in the chamber began to turn to panic as beings realized they were trapped. Many of the vassal species had no weapons and no military training. They had been kept weak and dependent by centuries of imperial rule. But Jake had an idea. He turned to Lisa, who was still monitoring the Emperor's failing systems. Can you access the palace's main computer through his biomechanical connections? Lisa looked surprised. Maybe. His implants are connected to the central network, but what good would that do? The Emperor told us there are weapons built into the palace walls, Jake said. If we can control those systems, we can turn them against the loyalist forces instead of the rebel species. Lisa went to work immediately, connecting her scanner to the dying Emperor's neural implants. The process was dangerous. One wrong move could kill Vextar instantly, and it might not work at all. I'm in, Lisa said after several tense minutes. I have access to the palace defense grid, but Jake, these weapons are incredibly powerful. If I activate them incorrectly, I could bring down the entire building. Do it anyway, Jake said. We didn't come this far to be stopped by the old guard. Lisa's fingers flew over her scanner's controls. Throughout the palace, weapon systems that had been offline for decades suddenly came back to life. But instead of targeting the rebel species, they turned on the loyalist forces trying to restore imperial rule. The sounds of battle echoed through the corridors as automated defenses engaged Zarathian soldiers. General Zarath's voice came over the communication system, screaming orders that no one could follow because her own forces were under attack by their own base. In the Senate chamber, the representatives watched in amazement as the palace that had been their prison for so long became their protector. The weapons that had once enforced their enslavement were now defending their freedom. Emperor Vextar made one final sound, somewhere between a sigh and a death rattle. His glowing eyes went dark, and the last of his mechanical parts fell silent. The Eternal Emperor was dead, and with him died the fear that had held the galaxy in chains for 8 centuries. The news of his death spread through the chamber like wildfire. Species that had whispered his name in terror for generations now shouted with joy that he was gone forever. Helen stood on the platform and addressed the crowd with the voice of a born diplomat. "Citizens of the galaxy," she called out, "today marks the beginning of a new age. An age where species work together as equals, where no one rules through fear, and where freedom is the birthright of every thinking being. The cheers that followed her words could probably be heard from orbit. 3 months later, Jake stood on the observation deck of the UNS Liberty as it approached Earth. Behind them, the former Imperial capital was now the headquarters of the new Galactic Council, where representatives from hundreds of worlds worked together to solve problems through discussion instead of domination. The trade agreement they had originally come to negotiate was now just one small part of a much larger partnership. Earth had become a founding member of the first truly democratic galactic government in known history. Tony joined Jake at the window, looking out at the blue and green world growing larger ahead of them. "Think they'll believe us when we tell them what happened?" Jake smiled, remembering the moment when he had dragged an emperor across a Senate floor and accidentally started a revolution. "Probably not, but it doesn't matter. The important thing is that it worked." Behind them, space was full of ships from dozens of worlds, all heading home to spread the news of freedom to their own people. The galaxy would never be the same, and that was exactly how Jake Morrison liked it. The young species from a small blue planet had taught the galaxy something that the Zorathian Empire had forgotten in 8 centuries of rule. That real strength doesn't come from the power to dominate others, but from the courage to stand up for what's right, even when you're outgunned and outnumbered. Especially then.